is Vajra, with a V. Sometimes I leave phone messages and I get calls back. Hi, is this Roger? No, it's Vajra. V as in Victor. And this is my wife, Pavani. It is our joy to be with you this morning, sharing Sunday service. I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, Paramahansa Yogananda's book of prayer demands. Number 10, demand for the opening of spiritual temple doors everywhere. O Father, when I was blind, I found not a door which led to thee. But now that thou hast opened my eyes, I find doors everywhere. Through the hearts of flowers, through the voice of friendship, through sweet memories of all lovely experiences, every gust of my prayer opens a new door in the vast temple of thy presence. Well, a week or two ago, I forget, Ganga Mata was talking about prayer, and she shared the story of the ministers who were talking about the best way to pray, and the man on the telephone pole who was overhearing them, and he offered that, in his experience, the best way to pray was hanging upside down from a telephone pole. And had I been there, I would have added to his conversation that giving a Sunday service is an excellent way to increase the fervor of your divine desire to connect with the divine. We often associate prayers with miracles, perhaps for that very reason. It's the all too often the need for a miracle that prompts us to pray and to reach out to the divine. And I got to thinking about, well, what really is a miracle? What is it that goes into a miracle? And I thought, well, a miracle is something that happens that occurs outside of our own ability to make it happen, outside of our own efforts to affect what's happening around us. And it occurred to me that there's kind of as life progresses, there's three ways that these unexpected events or these unexpected influences can happen. And one of them is the influence of karma. And it made me think back to when I was at the Atherton Center back in the early days of the Bay Area communities. There was another fellow there with me, and our situations in life were very similar. We were unemployed, we were devotees, we'd both gone to Stanford. There were just a lot of parallels in our lives. And I went out and got a job working for a contractor, and that developed into being a building contractor for quite a number of years after that. He went out and got a job building a cabinet for somebody that was opening a storefront and getting involved in some aspect of the computer world. And this was just at the very beginning. And he got on that train, and he rode it, and he was very successful from there on out. And it was that as though every endeavor that he got into was the Midas touch. It turned to gold. Everything turned to gold. And that's a good example of karma. The karma of his life took, similar actions that we took him in that direction. The karma of my life took me in that direction. Though I never developed that Midas touch, I must say I'm awfully glad to have wound up where I wound up here. Another way that outside influence can come into our lives is through grace. And that's where many of the stories of miraculous events come from. And I experienced something of that myself in a way that I never really found an explanation for, which was when I was living in Nevada City, and it was winter, and I was driving in my pickup truck, which those of you who have pickup trucks know they have pretty close to zero traction unless they're four-wheel drive or have a lot of weight in the back. And I was coming down a steep hill, and there'd been a lot of snow, and the banks were piled up high on either side of the road with absolutely no shoulders, no clearance. There were 2 lanes, and that was it. Just room for 2 cars to pass. And there was a car coming up the hill, and I was coming down the hill, and I touched the brakes ever so lightly. I know how to drive on ice because I was born and raised in Minnesota. So ever so lightly, and even so, I was instantly sideways. Going down that road, taking up the full width from bank to bank, and the car was coming up. I have to concede that in that moment, prayer was not on my mind. I was waiting for the crunch. And the next thing I knew, it didn't happen. And I was past the car, going down the road, and he was up there, going up the road. And to this day, there's, in my mind, no logical explanation of how we got from point A to point B. So many of us have had similar experiences in our lives where there's just no way to explain it any way other than grace. And the third way that that process can happen, you can call it outside, it's really inside, because we're all connected with God, and God is never really outside of us. But where the influence is felt, at least seemingly from outside, is through the process of prayer and attunement. It's more of the conversation that we're having with God. I'll talk more about that later. And that conversation, well, the incidents that I had where I experienced that in a very sweet way was I had been meaning to have for some months. Pavani and I are the managers of the community, and somewhere between half and 2/3 of the people there are Ananda Sangha participants, people who are on the spiritual path, and the others are not. Good people, some of them wonderful community members, but not particularly interested in the spiritual path or interested in it, but on a different path. And there are those there who simply have no interest whatsoever. And you have to wonder why they're there. Well, it's a nice place to live if you've ever visited there. But there was one particular fellow who'd been there for years, never participated in any community events. And the thought came to my mind, well, you know, being here in particular isn't especially serving him. There are lots of people who would love to be here in this community because it's a World Brotherhood colony, because it supports spiritual growth. So I wonder if he's ever thought about moving. But every time I thought about that is, how can I go up to him? You know, I can't just go up and say, so, have you ever, would you like to move? That's just tacky, inappropriate. So, did I say something wrong? You're trying to get rid of me? Is that the deal here? So I had an opportunity. I had to do some work in his apartment. And as I was coming to his apartment, I said, okay, Master, I really feel like something should be said about this. At least the seed should be planted. The thought should be put out there. But if you want me to do it, you're going to have to show me how, because I can't see how to do it. So I went in there and started working on this sheetrock repair, and we got into a conversation about the sheetrock and about maybe the kitchen should be painted and the community and this and that. And he started talking about his dad who was in the hospital and his mom who was out on the coast. And we're going along, and all of a sudden there was a moment, there was an opportunity, and the words just came to me as clear as a bell. And I said, so how about you? Have you ever thought about moving? And I knew it was the right time and the right words, because his immediate response was, I have thought about that. And he launched into a whole conversation, and we had that conversation about, there were changes happening in his life. His job situation has changed. His parent situation has changed. And this was a time when he was thinking about it. He was considering it. And I had no interest in pushing it. The idea was just to open the conversation, to plant the seed, to allow it to happen. As I said to him, a lot of times, and we discussed all the challenges and difficulties of moving too. But I said a lot of times these things, they just kind of sit on the back burner for a while. And then at some point, something happens, and you just know it's time. And we left it at that. And I don't know what will come of that, if anything, but I felt good about it because I felt like, okay, right, that was what I felt needed to happen. Just the thought put out there in the ethers. And Divine Mother was gracious enough to provide me with the opportunity, and I was fortunate enough to be able to hear when the words came to me. And they were words that for weeks I hadn't been able to find. But in that moment, they came to me. I have a story to tell. That's not exactly about prayer directly, but it does fit in because it's about wishing. And all too often, our prayers are essentially wishful thinking. So anyway, there's 3 guys on a desert island, and the bottle washes up, and they pull the cork out of the bottle, and out pops the genie, and the genie looks at them and says, well, I got 3 wishes. There's 3 of you. I'll give each of you 1 wish. So he turns to the first guy, and the first guy says, oh, no question. I want to be back home in my backyard working in my garden. Poof, he's gone. Turns to the second guy, and the second guy says, I want to be in Las Vegas, at the tables, whooping it up, having a great time. He's gone. He turns to the third guy and says, well, my friend, what about you? And he says, I just have the hardest time with this kind of thing. Making decisions has just always been such a challenging thing for me. I just can't seem to make a decision on my own. I wish my buddies were here. Poof, poof. You got to be careful what you wish for. Faith is a call to prayer. Prayer is a call to faith. Well, prayer is a call to faith is fairly straightforward because if we're praying, it presupposes that we have some thought that there's going to be a result to it, and that's the faith part. We know from our experience that we do have a connection with the divine, and that if we talk to that divine, it opens things up and makes the possibility of things to happen. But what does it mean to say faith is a call to prayer? Well, again, as Swami has pointed out, the difference, he makes a distinction between belief and faith, where belief is just something that, again, wishful thinking, you would like to be so, or something that you've been told is so, and so you take it because you've been told that that's the way it is. Faith is something that's based on your own direct experience, where we know because we've had it happen, and we realize that, yeah, there is something there, and I can feel it. I know it. I've seen the difference in my life, so I know it's there. So when you have that faith, the natural thing is to want to connect with it, to want to have it more in your life, because that's where all the good stuff happens. That's where we find the most gratifying results. That's where things work out, really work out, and you can feel it within. So having faith naturally develops the desire to connect more with it, to develop the attunement to it, and that's where the vehicle of prayer comes in. So what do we pray for? Sister Gyanamata had one of the greatest prayers. She said, Lord, change not my circumstances, change me. Wow. It's that egoic desire, those egoic attachments, when they come into the picture that influence us and make us want to change the world out there so that it'll be more pleasing to us. It gets us into all kinds of trouble. There's the metaphor of the horse in the field. And we see the horse in the field and our mind tells us that's a horse. So far, no problem. Then we go to, oh, that's my horse. Now that's the ego involvement, but it's not yet a problem. And the ego itself is not a bad thing. The soul identified with the body, it actually gives us the awareness that there is something that can aspire to something higher. So it's essential to have that. Then we go to, I like my horse. Now we've got a problem. Because I like my horse means that what happens with my horse matters to me. If my horse pleases me or displeases me, makes a difference. Now we get into a situation where we're a little bit more tenuous with what the results are going to be. I remember as a builder walking around a construction site and seeing a pry bar laying in the mud, and I walked by and said, somebody left their pry bar in the mud, and I took a few more steps and I went, that's my pry bar. That was a revelation because my relationship to that pry bar turned 100% in that moment. Oh my God, what is my pry bar doing out in the mud? Some idiot must have borrowed it from me and left it in there. Boy, if I could just get my hands on him. All of that from the thought that that was my pry bar and it mattered to me. Well, an example of the dangers of something like that, especially when it comes to prayer, is the man who went to heaven and was being shown around by St. Peter. And they came to this fenced-in area with all kinds of stuff. Beautiful houses, beautiful cars, yachts, swimming pools, everything you could imagine that one would ever want on earth. And he said, what's all this? And St. Peter said, that's the heavenly junkyard. The heavenly junkyard? Yeah, it's the things that God offered to people and they didn't want. He said, whoa, wait a minute. This is all stuff that people didn't want, yeah? So you're telling me, like, I see a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud sitting there. You're telling me that somebody actually turned that down? I said, yeah. And it's funny you should ask because it was you that turned it down. He said, no way. How could I have turned something down like that? And he said, well, fact is, all you ever prayed for was a Cadillac. When we put our egoic desires on it, we limit what God can do for us. We keep from finding out what is really there to offer us. God has a better idea what we need. He's not so much interested in our likes and dislikes, but what it is we really need, what it is that will bring us to Him, what it is that will bring us that joy and fulfillment. So the idea we're trying to get to in our conversation with God is to keep that egoic pull out of it. And conversation is an interesting way to think of prayer, too. It's something that Frank Laubach, the Christian missionary, that was his way of relating to God. It was an ongoing conversation. It was a sharing, and when you're sharing with friends, you're not saying, I want this, I want that. You're just sharing what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and it may be good, bad, ugly, or not, but you're sharing with a friend. It's a conversation. It was described what it was like when he would bless a meal. And the way it was described was, it was as though this conversation were going on silently, and then at a certain point, the volume was turned up, and you heard what he was saying, and that was the blessing. And then at the end, it was turned back down, but you had the feeling that the conversation was going on. And that's how it should be in our lives. Every moment, having that conversation with God. That's really at the heart of what prayer is making that connection, feeling that attunement, sharing what's happening for us, and listening for what the response is. Listening in those quiet moments. I know for me, I don't get the dramatic, voices or anything like that. It's more like a thought that creeps in, and you get to recognize it after a while. Okay, that was not on my own egoic brain that came from. That was a little input. Pay attention to that. Master gave us some wonderful examples of how to pray. There was, when he was running the school at Ranchi, they had a little deer, and they would feed the deer and take care of it. And one day he had to go away early. He fed the deer early before he feed him before I go. Well, one of the boys disobeyed, and they fed him, the deer some milk. They overfed him, and the deer got very sick. Yogananda returned, and the deer was dying. And he sat down and prayed fervently, as he put it, for the deer. And sure enough, the deer came back to life. From death's door, came back to life. And he stayed with the deer. 2 o'clock in the morning, the deer appeared to him. The soul of the deer appeared to him and said, "Let me go. I'm not supposed to be here. It was my time to go. Please release me." The deer either wouldn't or couldn't go without Master releasing him. Such was the power of his prayers. And he realized, and this is the way he spoke about it, he said that his prayers were based on selfish attachment. Now, a realized master doesn't really have issues with that, but they do these things as a way of showing us how we should relate to it. And it's a beautiful example of being careful with what we pray for. Davy had a wonderful blog recently in which she was trying to think of how to pray for a friend who was in need of physical healing. And as she was walking along pondering it, she saw a road sign that said DIP. And it immediately came to her, DIP, detached, impersonal prayer. When you're praying for somebody, you're not necessarily praying for them to be physically healed from what they are. We ask for Divine Mother's healing presence in their body, mind, and soul. We're praying for their soul. We're praying for their own highest good. And it may be in a physical healing, but we have to allow room. It's like praying for somebody who's on their deathbed. Well, if it's their time to go, you can actually hold somebody back by praying that they not die when it's their time to go, when it's their time to move on. That's a selfish interest. That's not a prayer in their best interest in that case. So it's always God's will that we're looking for and not our own. There's another example of prayer where Master Sister Roma asked him if he would please do something with her husband, who was just terrible about, her faith in God, always deriding it, always putting it down. And he said, Master said he would. They went to visit a temple in Dakshineswar, and he was giving them all kinds of grief, all the way, this is probably some scheme to get me converted, right? I don't know why you follow these sadhus anyway. They're either as skinny as a skeleton or as fat as an elephant. Well, Yogananda roared with laughter when he said that, which kind of took the steam out of all his jibes. So he went in silence after that. And he said to Yogananda when they got there, "Look, I don't care about your schemes, but one thing, you make sure that our lunch is provided for. You make sure those arrangements are there." And Master told him, "Divine Mother will take care of our lunch." He said, "I have no expectations whatsoever from Divine Mother, but I am holding you personally responsible for our lunch." And he went off, and Yogananda went out and meditated and meditated and prayed and meditated. I've got to read you this one section because Yogananda's way with words is wonderful. At the temple, there's a stone image of Kali. And he says, "Silent Mother with stony heart, I prayed. Thou becamest filled with life at the request of thy beloved devotee Ramakrishna. Why dost thou not also heed the wails of this yearning son of thine? My aspiring zeal increased boundlessly, accompanied by a divine peace. Yet when 5 hours had passed and the goddess whom I was inwardly visualizing had made no response, I felt slightly disheartened." Well, it got to be noon, the temple doors were closed, and the brother-in-law was fuming. Yogananda walked out into the courtyard, which under the India noonday sun was blistering hot, burning his feet, and stood there and said, "Divine Mother, I wanted to offer you a special prayer for my brother-in-law." He had a vision. The temple door opens. Divine Mother came to life. It was a superconscious experience where he saw everything 360 degrees. And he said to Divine Mother, the living presence of Divine Mother, "Will you not change my brother-in-law spiritually?" And she said, "Thy wish is granted." Now that was a wish that was grantable. And she receded, and his brother-in-law approached him, mad as a hornet. And just as he approached and was railing about lunch, a priest came out and said, "I have been watching you, your beatific face as you sat in meditation. And when your party first arrived, I felt moved to provide you with lunch. It's against our temple rules to give anybody lunch unless they've made prior arrangement. But I felt to make an exception in your case." The brother-in-law, needless to say, was dumbstruck. Did not say a word the whole rest of the time, and in fact, experienced a complete spiritual turnaround. Became a deep devotee thereafter. Such was the power and persistence of Master's prayer. On the other side of the spectrum, Master used to drive back and forth between Encinitas and Washington, and on the way in Laguna Beach was a little shop that had a Scottish shortbread that he fancied. And he would stop there and get the shortbread. And he stopped there one day, and he asked her, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We sold it all today. We're sold out." And actually, he sent Diamante in to ask, and she came back with that report. And his immediate response was, "Divine Mother, how come?" Now, it wasn't that he needed the shortbread. He didn't need the shortbread. But it was more that, am I missing something? Are you trying to tell me something here? Why is there no shortbread? Why is this an issue? Immediately, the woman comes out of the shop with a package and says, "Here, I made this for somebody earlier, but he lives here and he'll be in later. I can make some more in the meantime. Why don't you take it?" So even in the smallest things, it's that much sweeter when these little details are taken care of by Divine Mother. So really, whether it's a matter of life and death or a matter of the most trivial detail in our lives, if we can include God in the conversation, we can be that much more certain that whatever the outcome, the results will be all for the best.